Sean, welcome to the Witch Church podcast. And I'm super excited to be beginning this new series with you. We met through the Chicago Astrologers Meetup group that we've both kind of been trying to spearhead in the past couple months. So, super excited to talk to you about this month's transits. Sean, do you want to give us a little background of how you found astrology and what your journey has been like so far?
Sure. The short version is it was a long story. But basically, I fell down a huge rabbit hole just getting curious about what people are talking about when they say they're doing magic. And then magic led to astrology, and I started to read about astrology to figure out if I could debunk it because clearly it's obviously fake. And the more that I was reading, the more curious I became. And now, 3 or 4 years later, I've read like 50 books about astrology. And so I'm totally self taught. I haven't taken any courses yet. I would like to, but the goal for me is just to continue learning, um, read more charts, like read as many charts as I can. And yeah, how long have we been doing the Chicago astrology group? It's been like a couple months now, I think, since the
Yeah,
summer.
I think it's been probably like 6 or 7 months by now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if any listeners are popping on from Chicago, you can find me or Sean on Instagram. I'll have Sean's stuff linked in the show notes. And then we also have a Chicago astrology group Instagram where we'll post about meetups. Um, and I see your little kitty behind you. And what is your big three, Sean?
So I'm a Taurus rising, Leo sun, and a Virgo moon.
Okay. Okay. We love. And is there anything like, what's your favorite part of your chart?
Favorite part of my charts, I actually have some fun. Um, I have a couple of planets in Capricorn, which is good for me for the coming month, like with Sun and everything else happening. But I have Saturn, I have Neptune, and I have Uranus.
Okay. We love it. We love it. I have some secret Capricorn placements too. So this is why we get along and we uh we like to talk about astrology. So I'm thinking this is kind of a big month ahead, especially for retrograde season. And we're going to take our audience through our top three or our big three lunations, or not lunations, our big three transits for this month ahead, December 2024. And then we're also going to talk about both lunations, the full moon, and the new moon of this month. And I'm wondering, I have actually an image that I want to share with you because I think it's like my Piscean nature. So I was like walking around today and I was like, you know, told my guides if there was anything that I needed to share with the audience or with Sean, like what would it be about the month ahead? And it's so funny because I saw this image of it was almost like a Robin Hood type guy. Like he was kind of like in the forest and he was packing up for a trip and he had his horse and he had like all of his things. He was making sure all of his things were organized and packed for this next adventure. And specifically, he was also sharpening his arrows.
Okay.
So it's not to say he was going into battle, but it felt like there was so much preparation going on for somewhere he didn't even know he was going. Because if you had asked him, like, what's your destination, he would have said, like, I don't know. I'm just packing up and I'm prepared for anything. And I got that image and I was like, oh my God, this is so funny because there are so many retrogrades this month with Mars and Mercury. Perhaps we are preparing for like a longer thing that we don't even know about yet. Because oftentimes we do prepare during a retrograde.
And the first thing I thought about was the arrows with Sagittarius because obviously like an archer. needs to have those ready. And yeah, so the Mercury being in Sagittarius right now for the foreseeable future for a while.
Totally, totally. And maybe that'll bring us to our first, we'll get right into it and bring us to our first of the big three. So December 6th, Mars will station retrograde at 6 degrees Leo. And we already have been in the Mars retrograde shadow for a little bit. So it's possible that the Mars retrograde story collectively and in your own individual life has already began. But the spark notes would be that again, Mars will station retrograde on December 6th in Leo. He'll back into Cancer. And then he's retrograde until February 23rd, 2025, when he stations direct at 17 degrees Cancer. And then get this, guys, it's not until the beginning of May where Mars will clear his shadow. So those are the stats. I want to know, Sean, it seems like you were kind of into this transit, this Mars retrograde. What are you thinking about with this one? And yeah, what's been on your mind?
I have a ton of friends and people whose charts I've been reading who have Mars in Cancer, and everybody's lives around me have been blowing up. And this is like obviously the whole nation is having some problems, and I think that the main emotion, obviously, that comes out of Mars retrograde is like frustration, irritation, and with a transit, it's like it happens somewhere in your own personal chart, but it's happening for everybody. I think that's the most important things about transits is that it's hitting everybody somewhere different. And so any retrograde period is about a time in which that planet's natural expression is either kind of blocked or turned inward or just not being able to be expressed as well as it might be. And Mars is one of the worst retrograde planets. Like it gets so like I find it funny that Mars is in a really bad position in Cancer, and the word crabby always comes to mind for me. It's like just crabbiness and just feeling, well, obviously, right now it's still in Leo, but Leo, like Mars in Leo, is a funny placement because Mars is a really hot planet and Leo is a fire sign. And so there's like, in Leo is a showman, like Leo wants to be seen and recognized and appreciated, and Mars being frustrated in that sign, like having your actions frustrated in place in a kind of flavor where you want to be seen in the best light, or you want to be on stage, or you want to be like showing off, is even worse energy. I think it just like gets really super hot, and it's going to be rough, especially for people who have like fixed sign placements, because whatever you have in those houses will be square or in opposition. And yeah, my takeaway was like stay hydrated, take care of yourself, get a lot of sleep, do all the good things, and like just try to roll with it because it's gonna last for a while.
Totally. That's the thing about Mars retrogrades that it's kind of the kicker. Like, we don't get them very often, but when we do, they seem to last forever. And I would love to know, like, you said that Mars might be a little bit uncomfortable in Cancer, and you're referring to like the essential dignity of Mars being in, is it detriment or fall in Cancer? I always get detriment and fall mixed up.
Yeah, it's in fall because it's an exaltation in Capricorn. Um,
Yeah.
Funny because like yeah, like we have a lot of things moving into Capricorn, and they're all going to be opposite that Mars in Cancer when those things want
Yes,
to.
that's a good thing to note about the upcoming Mars retrograde, that maybe in our own Cancer Capricorn axis, we'll be having a little bit of tension. Although I don't think that's foreign tension for any of us because, Pluto has until recently been in our Capricorn house for so long. And I would say that Cancer Capricorn axis has been through a lot in the past couple years. So maybe there's some kind of wrapping up of the story even with the Mars retrograde.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like hopefully the end. Obviously, who's to say we could get more? But yeah, the other thing that I wanted to mention too is like in some of the ancient texts, retrograde actually refers to something being delayed. So I think it can be sometimes a feeling of like it, Mars is about action and wanting to take action. And one of the things that can be frustrating when you want to take action is having to wait. And so even like you're saying, like wrapping things up, if we're it's not that we're wrapping things up, we may be wrapping things up and not seeing the final effect of those until later. Like the effect itself may be delayed. And so you may be frustrated because whatever has actually been trying to come to a close will take a little bit longer to actually. And
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, the general political situation is like, I think that speaks. I mean, I think it's really important to say that like this whole cycle will last all the way out to May. So even after May, we'll still be feeling like the delayed reactions of whatever is going on right now, which I think totally tracks with it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was actually born during a Mars retrograde in Leo. And I actually, what's funny is I find Mars retrogrades to be really important times for me as a Mars retrograde native. And I don't want to say an easier time, but I find that there's usually something profound going on. So, for anybody listening who has a Mars retrograde natally, yeah, it could be a particularly important time. Something I've thought about with Mars retrograde in Leo specifically is kind of like a struggle with maybe battling my own self-doubt, which is very Mars and Leo, I think, like needing to kind of come into um, kind of peace with your own abilities and talents and like kind of harness those and pursue those with confidence and not doubt those things. And perhaps I'm projecting my experience a little bit. But I think there is something about this Mars retrograde that it being partially in Leo, I think there is something about maybe taking stock of where we have been acting with too much self doubt or where we haven't been taking enough risks because we have been maybe holding ourselves back. And of course, the stereotype of Leo is the showman. And of course, we could go that direction and I'm sure everything exists on a spectrum. And I think there could be like a real reckoning with one's maybe confidence in their own abilities during this retrograde. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe it could be possible too. I could see it even. Okay, I would say like every single person will experience this transit in a different way. And I think it could be possible to experience like overconfidence. That sometimes Mars can be, Mars, so Leo is a sign that's all about confidence. And then Mars can be a little bit over, like it can warm up or heat up something that's in that sign. And being overconfident and making a huge mistake because of it would be totally possible, especially if you had something square in like one of the other signs. And I think just to speak to my experience of the election, a lot of the people that I talked to were totally confident going into, and it didn't work out quite the way that everybody expected. So I think that's one thing to note too, is that it could go the other way. You could be too confident and have a little pride before the fall.
Wait, I love this. I love it. I think there's something, feels like if we were to title the Mars retrograde, we could maybe call it the spectrum of confidence. And like the trials and tribulations of both sides of the spectrum, being too confident and then being too invested in your own ego story about your self doubt or your inabilities. It could go both ways. And then, of course, in Cancer, when Mars goes into Cancer, then we get emotional about it. And, then our emotions might stagnate us, or we might have to work through grief or processing in order to move forward. And I think that's partially why Mars is so uncomfortable in Cancer at times. I mean, Cancer is the moon sign. And something I told my astrology students, I don't know if this was a good thing to tell them or not, but I said, Mars, the nature of Mars is to not care. The nature of Mars is to make decisions purely from impulse. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in order to make a decision and not care, you kind of have to like consider yourself and what is best for you. So, partially the reason that Mars has such a hard time in Cancer is because Cancer so deeply cares. So, that's partially why Cancer kind of slows down uh the intentions of Mars in that sign.
Yeah, and there's like the elemental piece of it too, where if you, I think of Mars and Cancer like when blacksmiths are working and they take the hot prod and stick it into water, and it starts to boil over a little bit, and so it's like this quenching that sometimes needs to happen. If Mars can be, like I said, like if Mars and Leo can be a little bit excessive, I sometimes, and then going backwards kind of puts out the fire. That could be good or bad depending on whether or not that fire is burning too hot. But Mars just doesn't like being wet. I mean, it doesn't like being cooled off, obviously. So
That's
yeah.
so good. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely very Aristotelian of you to say. So definitely. I like that. I like our synopsis though of Mars retrograde. It's a spectrum of confidence, and it's a little bit like this planet who doesn't like to be wet, doesn't like to have emotions necessarily. And he's in the ocean. He's getting hit by a wave.
And
Now,
I
are you feeling ready to move on to our next transit, or any other like last thoughts about Mars retrograde?
say one more thing that it's exact, or it stations retrograde on the 6th, correct?
That's correct.
Is that it's we're going to talk about this next transit here in a second, but it's going to be opposition within a couple of degrees of the Pluto and Venus situation too. So that could be messy. That could be even messier, like because this like Mars Pluto axis. So I have Mars and Pluto opposition in my natal chart. Like again, to talk about natal things, um, but it's really tough. It's really tough energy. There's a lot of like things coming to light and like things that bubble up from the surface. So
Yeah, that might. Yeah, I think that'll tie in because, like you said, it'll
yep.
be December 6th when Mars stations retrograde 6 degrees Leo. Now he's backing into an opposition with Pluto, who's now in Aquarius. And then the day after, with our second highlight of the month, December 7th, Venus will actually move into Aquarius and immediately enter that conjunction with Pluto in Aquarius. So Pluto definitely has his hands in, the pots of both Venus and Mars right now. Um, and in general, I guess we could talk about the significations of Venus Pluto and what that cocktail sometimes brings up.
Um, yeah, I mean, I Venus is obviously about like bringing things together. There's warm, fluffy energy there. There's like joy and comfort in pleasurable sensations, whatever those may be. And then Pluto to me is it's about transformation, but more importantly for me, Pluto is about things that are in your unconscious or in the collective unconscious, and things that sometimes erupt from the inside of those places unexpectedly, not maybe as unexpectedly as like Uranus energy, but yeah. So like Venus. in coming into contact with Pluto is like maybe finding or realizing things that you didn't realize that you enjoyed or liked, or things that you've unconsciously um, liked or wanted to be close to that you were not able to express at any point, but then those energies come together in some way.
Mm.
But that's just me riffing. That's my Mad Libs. How do you feel about it?
Well, when you said Pluto being a signifier of the collective unconscious, and that for me just immediately brought up this, maybe I don't want to call it a phenomenon, but the 4B movement becoming more popularized in the US. And for those who don't know what the 4B movement is, I'm about to read this description from Wikipedia. So the 4B, or Four No's, is a radical feminist movement that originated in South Korea. The name refers to its defining four tenets, which all start with the Korean language letter B, which roughly means no. And the 4B movement basically like calls women not to date men, get married, have sex, or have children with men. And this was essentially, this came about in Korea. My understanding is because, like, societally and politically, women do not feel that they have equitable, equitable treatment, or even on a household level, like women are feeling like I do all of the labor, the emotional labor, the blah, blah, blah. So I'm just gonna like not really, you know, I'm not gonna F with men. And I've, since the election has been happening or has happened, I've seen now a lot of American women making content, at least on TikTok and Instagram, in this same tone of like, if men don't step up, then I'm simply not going to have you in my life. And I've also heard a few stories of women breaking up with boyfriends because of election results. And it's not to say this can't go either way. Like, I'm sure somewhere in the country there's a boyfriend who broke up with his girlfriend for, voting differently or whatever. But I think there is something very Venus Pluto about that. Venus ruling over groups of women or groups of femme beings, and then Pluto being a power dynamic. Um, I think this is particularly a really intriguing transit when it comes to the aftermath of our US election. Are there going to be protests? Are there going to be, um, I could really see truly a protest kind of happening around this time. Yeah, that's my initial reaction in some way.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that this is then happening in Aquarius. And Aquarius is all about Aquarius, ruled by Saturn in traditional astrology, is not like the fun, nice age of Aquarius that gets sung about in the disco song. Aquarius can be like very cold and aloof and very like emotionally distant. So women saying no, we're not gonna do anything with men is a very like emotionally distant place to take or a position to take. And then also it has like implication for society as a whole, or like societal change, or like the collective good as opposed to like individual um good and feelings. So it's like opposite Leo. Like Leo is very self-centered, and Aquarius is very community or like collective centered. And so yeah, like collective action or protest movements can definitely happen in Aquarius. I think that's like a very um, that's a very apt reference, but also like the Saturnian element of being like cold, distant, separate, segregated away, or like separating in some way, and then being opposition to Mars, which is retrograde. So like Mars representing men, retrograde on the back foot, being like, I mean, we hope being chastised in some way. Hopefully, maybe they'll get the message. But yeah, that's like a huge, powerful statement.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking too, like, you know, I'm sure we've had in the time period with Pluto being in Aquarius a little bit before now. I'm sure we have had Venus conjunct Pluto in Aquarius at some point. But I don't quote me on that. But regardless, I think Venus just running into Pluto so quickly after he moved into Aquarius, I feel like Venus needs to have a discussion. Venus needs to say something to Pluto about harmony, about society, about women. And I think it's an important moment. Now, individually in our lives, I do associate Venus and Pluto transits with transformation in relationships. And the holidays are coming up and they are arguably already here. And I think sometimes when the holidays approach, we have reckonings with the relationships that we're in. And that is a difficult part about the holidays, when you're getting together and with your family and you're like, all right, am I bringing this person home or are they getting cut? um so it doesn't have to be that cryptic, of course, but I think that is a real manifestation that we could be going into. On the other hand, I was just talking to a client about how some grief they had experienced this year had completely changed their relationship for the better. And they were able to truly see their partner as exactly that, a partner. And that grief was able to be a catalyst for them really realizing and deciding this is the person that I want to be with. So we could also see that as well, sort of a commitment or realization, but it doesn't come from a sort of Disney like a perspective. It more comes from a like shit, like we've been through some challenges or we did work through this and now I know that things are worth moving forward. Does that make sense to you, Sean?
Yeah, because so like Saturn, I feel, is the planet which represents lessons you learn the hard way. So any kind of transit that's happening in a Saturn ruled sign is like, yeah, I learned this lesson. Maybe there was an easier way we could have figured that out, but now I have to like go through this grief process and find out that I wanted to be with my partner. Like, yeah, it hurts. It's like a pain. It's like painful lessons.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So, embrace the conflict though and embrace openness and honesty. That's sometimes my advice in a Pluto transit. And really sometimes with Pluto you don't have a choice because if you're not honest, then like like the something blows up, or it does come out. That's why they call it a Freudian slip, right? Like it comes out in a Freudian slip if you're not honest. So yeah.
Yeah, on that same day, on the 7th, we have Mercury, which is 5 degrees away from the sun in Sagittarius. So there may be a little bit of like not putting your foot in your mouth, but like saying something somewhat inappropriate on purpose. Like, Mercury in Sagittarius is just like, I'm gonna say whatever I feel like saying, and the sun is like your deepest internal. Yeah, there's a lot of energy around like things coming out of your mouth that maybe aren't going to be taken that well on that day.
Oh yeah. And it's so funny you say that because over the weekend I was traveling and of course I was nervous because Mercury was stationing retrograde and I was like, oh Christ, like the plane's going to get delayed or someone's going to have a heart attack on the plane. Like these are where my mind goes, right? Nothing happened. Like both planes I got on were completely on time. You know what did happen though? On the way home, it was a later flight. It was like maybe we got on the plane at like 7 p.m. and then we landed in Chicago at like 10:30. I have never been on a plane where so many people were talking on a night flight. And I was like, why are you guys talking? Like, what are you talking about? Like, like go to sleep. Like, why are we chatting? And I swear to you, there was robust conversation going on in all corners.
That's so
And I was like, this is Mercury in Sagittarius, in retrograde. Like nobody will stop talking.
that's amazing actually. Yeah, I mean, I'm big. That's something interesting I've been seeing more lately too. Is like people in general concerted effort to talk to strangers or like conversation around like getting off applications and meeting people in real life or like actually talking to people in real life. I feel like this may be like Aquarius related, like Pluto and Aquarius. I don't know, but there's like definitely a movement of people talking to each other in real life as opposed to like being on the phone.
Oh, I agree. I so agree. Yeah, so yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna be interested to hear the listeners' stories about, that time, December 6th, 7th, and 8th, especially those 3 days with the Mars station, the Venus conjunct Pluto, and then that Mercury approaching that Cazimi with the sun.
Just
Um,
one more fun fact. On that day, on the 7th, the sun at 16 degrees of Sagittarius is exactly opposite Jupiter retrograde in Gemini. So there could be some kind of like luck, bad luck. I would say bad luck for Jupiter retrograde. Um,
okay. That's yeah. There's something there where that feels very I flew too close to the sun.
oh,
I got I got a little too cocky.
maybe we will see. Keep a diary. Keep a diary. Write it down.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it. And yeah, if anybody is listening in retrospect and wants to comment down below on YouTube, we would love your story. We'll segue into the full moon in Gemini on December 15th, 2024, and it'll perfect around 2:15 a.m. I'm talking Central Time. Now, what's interesting though about this full moon in Gemini is that it's ruled by Mercury, who is now stationing direct in the next 24 hours or so. So Mercury will station direct by, December 16th. So I think it's interesting to have a full moon ruled by Mercury stationing direct in Sagittarius. Like there's something there about maybe, the miscommunications are not resolved. And perhaps the full moon is a chance to be honest and release some of those miscommunications. But then at the same time, I feel like they're still going on. And to also see the moon then travel to Cancer shortly after the perfection of the full moon, then it's like it gets emotional again. Which now that I'm talking about this, Sean, it reminds me of a similar thing we were talking about with Mars retrograde, getting more emotional in Cancer. Yeah, any initial thoughts about this full moon in Cancer, or sorry, in Gemini?
Yeah, I'm getting so both the moon and Gemini have similar significations of like cycles or like things moving quickly. So like Gemini can be really up and down or like back and forth, and the moon is moving really quickly. So they both have this same energy to me of like quick speed or like rapid changes. And being there, so it's like sign-based opposition. The moon and Jupiter are here in Gemini, and then we still have this Mercury and Sun over here in Sag. So to me, that would say something like miscommunicating emotional state, or like having a hard time communicating about your emotions, and having a hard time maybe even like, because the sun for me really represents like the core of yourself or spirit, like having some tension between like your like creative goals or your spirit and your emotional state there in Gemini, and like having it being kind of like rapidly cycling, and then when it's getting in, when it's moving into Cancer, things may be a little easier to like express emotional state, or like feel your own emotions. Some of us have a hard time feeling our emotions anyway, so I don't need any help with this. But yeah, it's like, and in like in times like this, I would just say the any Mercury retrograde period is like, I feel like the only way that you can kind of combat Mercury retrograde, and you can't really combat it completely, is just like pay attention and like try to journal as much as you can, like journal your emotional state. And then yeah, just be like, I'm curious to see how the Jupiter functions there too, like what the Jupiter is bringing. And again, like Jupiter retrograde to me is like a little bit of bad luck. So maybe this would manifest as like some bad luck. I wouldn't say like, I would say minor. It's not like a tight.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it makes me think about how the full moon is inherently in opposition, and an opposition will bring about two archetypes that kind of have a face off in a lot of ways. And it makes me think, what is the archetype of Gemini and Sagittarius being at tension with one another? For me, that's about the microscope versus the telescope. The microscope being Gemini, and Gemini wanting to examine things close up and collect data, versus Sagittarius wanting to go out with the telescope and see things from a greater perspective. They're not so analytical, and more philosophical. So it reminds me too about how sometimes we as humans, we try to connect with others about our emotions or about our needs and our wants, and we forget that not everybody will connect on the same level as us. It's kind of the same idea as the love languages. Like, we give and receive love in a different way than others. And oftentimes we try to give people the love that we want to receive. Um, in this case, maybe we try to communicate the thing that we want to receive. Does that make sense? Or we try to, the communication style that we're using doesn't hit, or we want so badly for that person across from the table to use the same communication style as us, but maybe they're just different. And maybe there's acceptance of that, or maybe those differing communication styles can find a common ground. But I think you're right, it's not until the moon actually finishes the full moon and moves into Cancer where that's actually going to happen.
Another thing I'll say about this too is like, so Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, like, not to be negative about any sign, every sign has good and bad qualities, but Sagittarius has a capacity to over exaggerate things a little bit. Like, I remember one of the significations, like there's that couple-hour long podcast, like the astrology podcast has like one episode about each sign, and one of the things that came up many times in the Sagittarius episode was, my mom's a Sagittarius, and she always says there was 1 million people at the show, or like there were 5 trillion people at my concert, or whatever. When in reality, yes, there were probably like 100 people there, but it wasn't 5 million. And so I think there's like Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius. I think it can be a little bit like maybe exaggerating your emotional state to yourself or to another person, and maybe that not, and again, like there's Jupiter too, which may be sort of like an inflated sense of something, or inflated emotion that's being communicated in a somewhat difficult or like not very clear way.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And like if we get more psychological with it too, why do we sometimes inflate our emotional state? It's because we don't feel heard, or we don't feel maybe justified in our emotions. So then we have to make them extra big. It's similar to like a toddler having a tantrum. Like toddlers would, escalate their emotions because on some level they're communicating like, mom and dad, I need you. I need you to pay attention to me. And I don't think we ever grow out of our inner child wounds. We get better at dealing with them, but, they come out in a lot of moments in our adult lives in different ways. So I think that's really interesting that you said that. And think it's a good thing to be mindful of, especially on this full moon mid month.
And the thing too about the world transits is like everyone will experience this energy. Like you and me and everybody that we know will all be having a tantrum exactly the same about different things. So I think it's like a very good reminder to be as patient as we can with everybody that everybody else is feeling something.
I like that. Patience is needed. We could call that the full moon on the 15th. That's our title for it, the patience full moon. Um
Yeah.
and that's a good segue because takes us to the beginning of Capricorn season. So December 21st. Is that also the winter equinox?
December
It
21st.
December 21st. Because it's a cardinal sign, right? So if it's a cardinal sign, I think it's an equinox, but I could be
It is indeed on the 21st at 3.
okay. So Sun moving into Cap, I think we might need some of that stabilization after the Mars retrograde and Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius, the full moon in Gemini. I'm actually looking forward to the Sun ingressing into Capricorn on the 21st. What are you thinking about this one, Sean?
I'm thinking, so I feel that the sun, so the luminaries have their dignity or have their domicile in Cancer and in Leo because those are the hottest months. And then once we get over into the winter months over here in Capricorn and Aquarius, the sun is technically peregrine in Capricorn, meaning that it doesn't have any special debility or anything. But I still don't think that the sun is thrilled to be in Capricorn, where it's a little bit cold, it's a little bit dry, it's a little bit. Capricorn is always like conservative in my mind. That's the first word that I think of. And like if we talk about the metaphor of the seasons, the like Libra and Scorpio are the months or like the signs where we're harvesting things and preparing for the winter. And then right in Capricorn, like winter is here. Winter isn't coming anymore. It's actually here now. And the sun, the days are shorter. The sun doesn't get as much time to shine or to even do what it wants to do. And yes, but at the same time, I think it can be like a restorative time if you use your winter months. Like I think a lot of people, I hear a lot of people talking about winter as a time to like really just chill out and do less activity, and sort of stay cozy and warm and get your I think it can be a good time for like introspection a little bit. Yeah, yeah, and the sun has significations of like intellect and the mind as well. Like it's sort of similar to Mercury in different traditions, but yeah, do a lot of reading, do a lot of organizing, do a lot of like getting your life together in the house. Like do your winter cleaning.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think it's also interesting that this is the first Capricorn season where um Pluto isn't in Capricorn. And that we've had in like a long time, right? So the sun actually gets to be in Capricorn without Pluto, which is pretty cool. And then for the next 20 years, we won't have an Aquarius season without the sun co-present with Pluto. So I'm interested to feel into what it's like to have a Capricorn season without Pluto there. So far, I mean, we're talking on November 26th, and Venus right now is in Capricorn without Pluto. And I actually have experienced Venus in Capricorn without Pluto to be so much more positive than previous Venus in Capricorn transits that I've, just remembered in the past 5 or 6 years. So I'm thinking this Capricorn season might feel better than previous Capricorn seasons, especially with, again, Pluto not there. Also, in as we've mentioned, Capricorn is a Saturn ruled sign, and Saturn is now direct in Pisces. So I think that restoration is such a good keyword, because Saturn in Pisces, although it's hard for Saturn to function in Pisces, he can't quite do what he wants to do there. He can do a lot of emotional restoration and maybe can set boundaries or do a lot of work on like foundational self-care rituals, things like that, foundational spiritual rituals.
Right. I was gonna say huge keyword for like doing magic, like doing vision work, like any kind, yeah, like any kind of Piscean energy is very like visionary and sort of going using your imagination. And so yeah, when I was mentioning like staying indoors, you just like, yeah, stay indoors, do some rituals, do some magical cleaning of your house. I like that.
I
Restore.
like, yeah, it's a vision board kind of winter.
Yes, exactly.
Make your vision boards, kids. And honestly, those things do work. Like I don't want to hear any smack talking about those because they do work. And yeah, I'm interested in this Capricorn season. Now that I think, Sean, brings us to the end of the month, which will mark the new moon in Capricorn. That'll be on December 30th. And I believe that's going to perfect at about 9 degrees. Yeah, it'll be a 9 degrees Capricorn new moon. And aspectually, it doesn't have too many exact aspects. Like it has a loose sextile to Saturn. And I think just the fact that it doesn't actually have anything messing with it, I think this is a good new moon to plant seeds. And this is something I think a lot about as an astrologer. Literally, the first thing I ask myself when I'm looking at the chart of a new moon, I'm like, is this a new moon to start new things? On the one hand, Mercury is still in his shadow until January 2nd, and Mars is still retrograde. However, I do think there is some newness that is blossoming, and I don't think this new moon feels like why does no excuses come to mind? The no excuses new
That's a
moon.
very important way of living too. Yeah, just like get it done, just do it because I said so.
Right, right. Like, I don't care that Mars is in retrograde. Like, there's still some things that we need to do, or perhaps for things, you know what the perfect thing to do during a Mars retrograde is do things that you didn't want to do, or do things that you've been procrastinating, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Any inklings or intuitions about this new moon at the end of December?
Yeah, I mean, the sense that I get from that, from this configuration, is like changes or things are going to start anyway. And things are going to start on that day anyway, whether you want them to or not. Like there's like a signification. So obviously, there's three signs of each element, and what is going on in Capricorn in the Earth is like during the winter time, you can't really plant a seed because the earth is hard. It's not gonna. But like the soil itself is getting ready. Like the decay is happening, and it's storing up all that energy to bring like the nice green things into blossom in the Taurus season. So whether or not you want things to be working at that time in Capricorn, like they're doing things, you might not be able to see them happening, but they're there, like they're moving forward slowly, coldly, like frigidly. But yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that I'll say about that too is like if we're looking at like a time to start, yeah, Mercury being in the sign of detriment in Sagittarius is like yeah, there's like a couple things in this chart. I wouldn't like start any major projects. I wouldn't like try to like start launch your business. But you don't want to do that in the middle of winter. So you're fine. Like little
Yeah.
things.
Little things, like things that you can move forward on. It's not the biggest decision of your life or the biggest launch of your life, but there are some minor things that I think are still worth, yeah, moving forward on.
And you're talking about ritual practice too. Like that would be a perfect time to like try a new ritual or like do something.
Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. And Capricorn's like the king of ritual, I feel, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like structured ritual.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this month, and I'm still liking that title of the Mars retrograde being the spectrum of confidence. Yeah. Sean, does it feel good to end our episode with a little oracle card pull?
So yes.
Yeah. And thank you so much for joining me. This was so fun. And you're helping me kick off a new ritual, which I'm going to try to film a collaborative Big Three podcast once a month for the next 12 months. So you're the first guest, and we'll see if it if it sticks. But I think I'm feeling pretty dedicated, honestly. I'm ready to talk about the month ahead. Makes it
Yep.
easier when you do it with someone fun, you know? Um, now, I just pulled from the Sacred Symbols Oracle deck. This is a deck by Marcella Kroll. And we got the card, the symbol that says home. And I think that's really interesting because we were just talking about how
Getting
astrology aside, yeah, winter is the place to go and be in your house and restore, rest. I'm getting this very literally, like things need to be done in our homes. I even said this yesterday to someone, how the state of our home is a reflection of our internal state, which is a very Virgo thing to say, actually. Your Virgo moon probably resonates. But yeah, I mean, if we have a closet that is stuffed with shit that we're not putting away or that needs to be donated and we're just not cleaning it out, I mean, think about that as a metaphysical or a psychological metaphor. So I'm getting a lot of literal home stuff. Does that symbol of home ring a bell to you, Sean?
I love that. No, I don't. I mean, yes, it rings a bell. The actual symbol itself, I don't recognize.
Yeah, let me actually see what that symbol is, because I think it might be a Norse symbol. Let me see.
I know nothing about Norse people. I don't. They, I have a lot of like random white ancestry, but not that guy.
Uh, oh, actually, Marcella Kroll says this is the morning star. The morning star is the brightest star on the dawn's horizon, considered an important spirit and honored as um, Kachina with most Pueblo Indians. The Plains and Great Basin indigenous people honored it as a sign of courage and purity of spirit. The ghost dance religion associated it with the symbol of coming renewal of our traditions.
There you go.
There it is. There it is. We love it. Thanks for wrapping it up for us, Marcelo Kroll. Well, Sean, thanks so much again. And it was so fun to chat with you. And I would encourage our listeners to go follow Sean. And we will be back all in spirit timing.